Your family is hell, but I love you. Written and read by Bad Writer. Chapter 2. Welcome to the Manor. It was a quiet afternoon in Gotham, though, while the sun was up, Gotham tended to be a regular, unimposing concrete jungle. Though there was something about Wayne Manor that had always nagged on John's nerves. Like a haunted house full of the undead, and Jason wasn't even home. Damien nudged his side, ushering him further inside, ignoring John's death grip on the bouquet of valerian blossoms, Selena's favourite, or so he'd been told. It was Alfred who greeted them first, offering them both a warm smile and a "Welcome home, Master Damien." Bruce was awaiting their arrival in the lounge room, and John's bouquet of flowers was set neatly in a gold-painted vase. Bruce stood when they entered, and John squeezed Damien's hand tightly. It wasn't like Bruce was some stranger to him. He'd known the man since he was in diapers. Still, it was unnerving coming face to face with his soon-to-be father-in-law. Damien had told John nothing about his family's reaction to their engagement, other than that they were supportive. Though, in his defense, it wasn't like John went into too much detail about his family's reaction. "John," said Bruce, extending a hand to be shaken, which was odd. Had he ever shaken Bruce's hand? Sure, they'd met formally, at galas, as Damien's date, or at Justice League press events. But even then, it had always been a sturdy clap on the shoulder, a sly smile sometimes. Once, when John's father had gotten himself poisoned with kryptonite gas 2 years ago, Bruce had even hugged him, let him cry on his shoulder, and now he wanted to shake his hand? John took it awkwardly. "I assume you don't need a tour?" he said, sitting back down. John chuckled awkwardly, scratching the back of his head. "Nah, I think I'll manage." Damien hip-checked him on his way to sitting down on the couch opposite his father, gesturing for John to do the same. "Is there any news on the Riddler?" Damien asked, leaning casually into John's space, acting as if any of this was normal. Bruce shook his head, turning to pour himself a glass of what John could only assume was to be whiskey. "John," Bruce offered politely, setting down another fine crystal glass beside his own. John shook his head. "I've got a lot of unpacking to do tonight." Bruce nodded and set the stopper back in the bottle. Damien made a little harumph noise beside him. He didn't even like to drink, but he would have liked the offer, law be damned. John scoffed and elbowed him. Idiot. "I put Cass and Stephanie on watch tonight, but I highly doubt the Riddler will be making any moves as soon after his last attack." Bruce sighed and took another swig of whiskey, slowly rising from the couch. "I suppose I should head down to the cave, see if the girls need any assistance. Damien, I'll see you on patrol." "Actually," Damien said, standing as well, inching away from John's grip, "I'll stay here tonight. Otherwise John will be putting everything in the wrong place." Bruce paused, and for a second, John saw something flash across his face, aging him suddenly. His lips pursed into a thin line. Back in Damien's room, John was hunched on the bed, seated awkwardly between several cushions and a peeved-looking cat. Damien was rummaging through his closet, clearing shelves and hanger space for John's things. "So that was weird, right?" John asked, stroking the soft fur on Alfred the cat's head. Damien cursed and tried to stuff a pressed dress suit into a pull-out cupboard. "What?" he grunted, using all his weight to stuff the drawer closed. "Your dad, he was like super weird." "Father's just like that, you know this," he heaved, finally slamming the drawer shut. "Yeah, but he's never that weird," John said. "He offered me alcohol. He shook my hand. He was being polite." "He was being weird." Damien groaned and finally turned to face John, looking tired and lamplit and beautiful, his hip cocked, arms folded, heavy dark brow furrowed. "Jonathan, you're letting your family's anxieties cloud your judgment." John's brow clerked. "Did you bug my place? How the heck did you know my family was worried about that?" "I didn't need to, Habibi," Damien chuckled. "I made an educated guess, and your reaction now just proves me correct," he said with a self-satisfied smirk, stalking closer to John, sliding onto the bed so his knees bracketed John's thighs, letting his fingers curl behind John's neck to fiddle with the downy strands of dark hair. "John," Damien said, this time in earnest, "we are both rather young. I suspected your father would have their reservations, and that's excluding the clone's history with my family." "But you don't think that, do you?" John asked softly, letting his hand steady Damien at his hips. "Beloved, in this line of work," Damien said, voice only a whisper, "every day could be our last. And I do not dare to think of a world where I did not have the chance to be your husband, to intertwine our souls, to always have a part of you, right here, in me," Damien said, tugging at John's wrist, tracing it over his chest to rest at the center, right above the soft melodic thump of a heartbeat John would know for the rest of his life and the next. "You can have another part of me in you right now if you want," said John, wiggling his eyebrows. Damien shoved him with a curse and a 2-4 scowl that did very little to hide the mirth hidden behind those green eyes. "You ruin everything," he snapped, but he leaned up and pressed a delicate kiss to his lips, his forehead resting against John's, smiling at him. The kind of smile that only John got to see, dimples and soft edges. John kissed him again. He couldn't help it. This placid, lovesick Damien was so rare and beautiful. John wasn't going to waste it. Damien readjusted as the kiss deepened, sitting more comfortably in John's lap. Alfred the cat let out an indignant meow and leaped off the bed. Damien laughed into his mouth, hands slow and careful as they shucked off jackets and unbuttoned shirts. John adored the feeling of Damien's warm skin beneath his palm, all muscle, ridged with scars, the strong lines of his body that John would know from memory. He'd kissed every inch of skin, let fingertips trace along a spine, let his lips mouth at the underside of a jaw. It was like sparring, like chess, like reading another person without needing to say a word. It was a dance between them, bodies tangled, slow and careful. Damien could read him so well, always could. Knew his body, knew what he needed. Always, since the beginning. John had not always had that skill. Their first time together, John had been too fast, too rough. It had been messy and terrible, and a mix of super strength and access to the internet's vast archive of pornography had not boded well for them. He'd broken Damien's rib and sprained his wrist, and the entire bedpost came crashing down on them partway through. Damien hadn't even finished. He'd felt guilty about it for weeks after. It had been Damien's first time ever, and John had ruined it. But with practice and time and trust, they managed to find a rhythm. Damien liked it slow. He liked to be held and kissed and told he was loved over and over again. Damien, who was always so self-assured, who hated the idea of needing to be protected. Damien, who was harsh and distant and often cold, sometimes just wanted to feel John, to kiss him, to press their bodies close, to whisper sweet nothings. Damien, who laughed during sex and smiled the softest of smiles, and near the end switched into a language John couldn't understand but didn't need to. It was those nights, the softest of soft, that John loved the most. So he couldn't understand why this night his mind wavered. Those words Connor had said, the flash of a look on Bruce's face. Bruce, who was in the manor right now. Bruce, who was right below them in the cave. Bruce, who had no doubt what they were doing right now. Bruce, who he would have to look in the eye tomorrow morning and pretend the night before he hadn't seen his son look like that, slipping off the bed onto his knees. "Damien," John said, trying to repress a horrified shiver, hand clasped over Damien's wrist to keep him from reaching forward for the zipper. "What's wrong?" Damien asked, sitting back on his heels, his free hand resting on John's knee to keep him steady. John groaned and slumped back onto the bed. "What the heck?" "Jonathan," Damien said, sounding genuinely concerned, crawling up to sit beside John, a palm on his forehead. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he grumbled. "John, when you start turning down blowjobs, I get worried. What's wrong?" John tried to laugh, but it came out an awkward gurgle. What if Bruce heard that? What if Bruce heard Damien say blowjob? He wasn't entirely sure how good human ears were supposed to be, but growing up in a household full of superhumans had left an impression. "John, it's your dad." Okay, I think I'm definitely going to need a better explanation than that, because what the fuck? "I can't do it here. It's icky." "Icky? What are you, 5? And father's not stupid. We're getting married. I don't think he expects me to stay pure until my wedding night. And Todd brings girls back here all the time. And he doesn't even live here." So Bruce definitely knew what he and Damien were planning on doing. Ew, ew, ew. How the heck was he supposed to even look Bruce in the eye ever again, let alone Batman? "Just because your parents make us sleep in separate rooms last Christmas does not mean my father is so ignorant. He'd be a hypocrite anyway, seeing as I exist, out of wedlock and all. Please don't make me think about your mother. You'll put me in a catatonic state." Damien just sighed and undid his slacks, chuckling when John tensed, forcing himself not to look. "You're an idiot," he said, sliding under the bedsheets, stretching out like a cat. John followed slowly, tucking himself under the covers beside Damien, pulling him close. "It's hard to explain. I know your house is super big, but with super senses, it's like he's right next door, and it's weird." "Beloved, it's all right. I don't mind," said Damien, snuggling in close, face pressed into the crook of John's neck. "We'll get our own place soon anyway, and we won't have to worry." "Yeah, I know,"